I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Graham Noble, Sarah Cowgill, Tim Donner, and Joe Schaefer. And this is Liberty Nation's online TV news program. With the 24/7 news cycle coming at us like a hurricane, it can be challenging to separate the noise from what matters. We've got a lot going on in the American political stratosphere. Amy Coney Barrett, the declassification of documents regarding Russiagate, the president suffering from COVID-19. I've asked our esteemed panel to choose one thing, what they think matters, and open that up for discussion. Tim, let's begin with you. So we're seeing some stories being ignored by the leftist media and others that are hyped. But with all the chatter and craziness, what's on your front burner?
Well, what's on my front burner is the fact that the American people, I don't think, have realized yet that when they're voting for Joe Biden, if they're voting for Joe Biden, they're essentially voting for Kamala Harris, because very few, if any, people believe that Biden could make it through one whole term. Nobody believes he could make it through two. So the chances of Kamala Harris ascending to the presidency without even being elected to it, I think, are much greater than people even realize, which is why I think there was such importance should have been attached to the vice presidential debate, not as a typical VP running mate debate that doesn't matter, but as a real display of what you're going to get if you elect Joe Biden, because it's all about what's behind the curtain, because Joe Biden is a sort of a pleasant front man for an agenda that nobody knows exactly who's pulling the strings, exactly who's making the calls. So I think people really need to pay a whole lot closer attention to Kamala Harris as something more, much more than an appendage of Joe Biden.
Well, I can tell you the people in the flyover states are terrified of her, and they already think that. They're not looking at him as presidential material. They're looking at her, and they are fully aware that she's, de facto the presidential candidate. So you may have a different point of view if you live in a large city or a highly populated area, or if you're on the East or West Coast. But all of the people in the middle are like, oh, heck no. They're fully aware that she will be the president. He won't make it, and they're fully aware of that.
I'm fairly convinced that actually Joe Biden, if he were to win in November, I am absolutely convinced that he will resign from the presidency in January of 2024.
Because of his cognitive decline, or he's just tired, or he just need to get Trump out? I'm just doing everybody a favor.
I think he refers to himself all the time as a transitional president. And I think he'll do that. I think basically he'll get to the beginning of 2024 and he will announce, for personal reasons, who knows, wants to spend more time with his wife, grandchildren, whatever.
I don't think it'll take that long.
Hand over to Kamala right at that point, and then she will be the president and run for re-election, essentially.
Yeah, good luck with the re-election chances.
Well, yeah.
It's very interesting what Sarah was saying about people in flyover country. I'm starting to watch all these electoral maps that show a Biden path to victory. And some of them are sort of convincing in a way, but they all involve him literally sweeping the Rust Belt, maybe not Ohio, but taking Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, all these states Hillary struggled with 4 years ago. So, okay, if that has to happen for this man to win, why the heck is Kamala Harris the vice presidential candidate? She doesn't add a single thing that's going to help attract voters in those areas. And, Scranton Joe only goes so far, like you said. So many people realize that Kamala Harris in many ways is the real candidate here. She's a California progressive. They have to win these working class states. This isn't a good formula for them.
But let me just say this, Joe, nobody plays better class warfare than Joe Biden. I mean, he's been playing this Scranton violin for a long time. And, it's interesting. Trump, they're both millionaires, but Trump is presumably the more wealthier of the two. But Trump has a way of capturing the people, and his message is much more populist, whereas Biden comes off, I think, is much more elitist.
Well, I mean, this whole Scranton Joe thing is an absurdity. The man left Scranton, Pennsylvania when he was 11 years old, and he's been ensconced in Washington, D.C. for 47 years as a poster child for the political establishment, the very thing that people voted against in 2016. The only real difference between Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton is the personality. But if you look at their policies, they're pretty much exactly the same. Biden now presents as more leftist because he has bowed to the left. And Kamala Harris, you know what? Kamala Harris is a product of Joe Biden's weakness because he was too weak not to commit early on. Oh, yes, I'll take a woman. And then he was boxed in. And then he was way too weak to resist the idea that he had to pick a person of color. Maybe he forgot that he'd also said he was going to pick a woman, because then he was left with women of color. It had to be the smallest field of candidates for vice president ever presented to a presidential candidate of his own making.
I mean, yeah, everything you say is right there. And what amazes me is this 47-year theme. I don't think people realize how powerful that is. That is never going to lose its punch. This guy was a United States senator before Godfather 2 came out. The movies, that famous movie that we've all grown up with. He was in the United States Senate before that movie was made. I mean, you can come up with all kinds of fun examples of this. This guy is a lifer. He's really at an age where he should be retired, relaxing, enjoying his grandchildren, whatever, and he's clinging on to this thing. That alone is such a turnoff to voters and people. And then they see this vice presidential candidate that he chose, who is another product of machine politics, Willie Brown's California machine, and she has always come across as a ladder climber. It's always the next step with her. So she didn't even think, hey, is me being on this Joe Biden ticket, good or bad for me? It's another step up the ladder. Of course I'm going to do that. So you have this resume, swamp resume candidacy against this brash populist outsider who just says the first thing that comes, to mind. And I think it's kind of crazy that we're all saying, oh, gee, Trump is saying ridiculous things, he's going to lose. These people are fossils, and they've been around forever. I don't see how Trump's personality is going to minimize how damaging that is in a country that's just dying for real change.
All right, let's move on to another one thing. Who's got a one thing that matters?
I got a one thing, and this is not in the news anymore. And I want to give a shout out to Tyler County, Texas, who actually had the cojones to sue Netflix for that ridiculous movie Cuties. They're the only ones that have come out and are putting on the gloves and trying to take this Netflix junk down. And I think that's impressive. You can't even, our Congress wouldn't do anything. You had a couple of barking here and there, but, this is a horrible, horrible sexualization of 11-year-old girls. I don't understand how it's even remotely still on Netflix, but it is.
Well, it's interesting because where is the left on this? I mean, they are the keepers of the Me Too. They are the keepers of the, women being over-sexualized. Where is the leftist voice on this? Somebody, please tell me.
The left is not interested in this anymore. The Me Too movement effectively ended when Tara Reade came forward and presented her charges against Joe Biden, which the elite big corporate media, big box media, as Joe likes to call them, they ignored it. They downplayed it. They said it wasn't possible. They couldn't find any record of it in the National Archives. And have you noticed that since then, the hashtag #MeToo has rarely, if ever, been invoked? It all ended with Tara Reade, because if what she said turned out to be true, that was the end of Joe Biden.
And Cuties was hailed before this whole scandal came down. It played at Sundance, Robert Redford's artsy film festival out there in Utah, where all the, all of the smart progressives who think so much of themselves go, they love that movie. They hailed that movie. So again, this kind of points out to me what I think is interesting is this urban rural, for lack of a better word, divide. If you're in this urbanite worldview, you want to wear your mask, you support the experts on the coronavirus, you think movies like Cuties are really groundbreaking and wonderful, and then you've got this other America saying, oh my God, they're supporting child pornography, they're making us wear masks. How are we going to put these two worlds together? The divide just keeps getting starker by the day. And I think the arrogance of the cosmopolitan urbanite left, it just gets more. I mean, when you're defending child pornography, I just don't see how you alienate yourselves more from the mainstream of the American people.
Okay, but let's not forget, these are the same people that are acting like Amy Coney Barrett is going to Jonestown to drink the Kool-Aid because she's Roman Catholic.
Well, the problem with Amy Coney Barrett for the left is that she's the worst possible person, not just because she's conservative, not just because she's Catholic, but she practices a brand of Catholicism that includes what you call the spiritual gifts, which includes, yes, speaking in tongues. I don't know that she speaks in tongues, but this is, for the left, in addition to losing the court for a generation with Amy Coney Barrett, they get the worst possible thing, which is a Catholic and an evangelical rolled into one on the court, making decisions on things like abortion. And I mean, there's no understating how panicked
Ruth Bader Ginsburg died
and apoplectic the left is. In a sense, what I think I said on a previous show here, that, this is, you could argue that Amy Coney Barrett getting on the court, giving a 6-3 conservative majority is more important than getting Donald Trump reelected for conservatives.
All righty. On that note, who's got another thing that matters?
Well, my thing that matters actually is one of my favorite subjects to write about, as it turns out, the Trump-Russia collusion circus. And right now we have ongoing investigations, at least one ongoing Department of Justice investigation into this, led by a Mr. John Durham, a prosecutor out of Connecticut. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, the election is coming up now. Nothing has been resolved there, with the exception of one single FBI attorney. No indictments have been handed out. This thing is still unresolved. Trump supporters are absolutely screaming, tearing their hair out in outrage that nothing as yet, no justice as they see it, has yet been meted out. And here we are at the election. Now, if Joe Biden were to win, we know that this investigation is going to be killed immediately. I mean, it's done. The whole thing is done. It's going to be shut down wholesale. And I wonder if that happens, what the reaction of the American people, or at least those Americans who are on the right side of the political spectrum, how do they react to that? I mean, I can imagine that the level of outrage is going to be insane. But at the same time, if Trump wins the election, then at that point, and I think in many respects, he doesn't have to worry about running for re-election again. I believe we're going to see a different Trump anyway in his second term. I think he's really going to take the gloves off when it comes to things like immigration. But also with this investigation into the what appears to be, from all the evidence that's coming out, the utter failure and deceit as well on the part of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, possibly the Central Intelligence Agency, and maybe with certain Department of Justice officials, I believe things are going to get extremely uncomfortable if Donald Trump wins a second term. Things are going to get extremely uncomfortable for the likes of James Comey, John Brennan, and various other characters, Peter Strzok, and certain other people.
I can't breathe, defund the police. And then you have the FBI is sacred. The CIA, we must trust and believe the CIA. And it just blows my mind that they can do those two things. Doesn't faze them at all. It seems like the most normal thing in the world. Crush the cop on the street and defend these deep state operatives that are trying to, who basically, we can say they took on a coup against a sitting president of the United States.
Nobody is paying attention to this because we're so close to the election. And, they needed to come out with this stuff earlier and they needed to pound it. Now it's just looking like partisan nonsense, and it isn't. It isn't partisan nonsense. It is. There are serious problems with what happened.
The thing that is, to me, crushingly disappointing is that, I have people ask me over these last year or so, when do you think Barr is going to come out with his findings? When's the Durham investigation going to be wrapped up? When are we going to learn something? When are there going to be indictments? When is he going to file some charges? When are we going to get a report? And my answer was always the same thing. I said, well, let me tell you this. If anybody is willing to take this on, anybody in Washington is willing to take this on and get the information and the truth out to the American people, it's Bill Barr. And Bill Barr has failed to do that. 16 and a half months into his investigation with John Durham, the famously tough prosecutor, what do we have? We have nothing. And what good does it do for the voters to find out after this election what was done to spy on the Trump campaign by the Obama Justice Department before the 2016 election? How can anybody make the case that the American people should not be given a full report of what happened, and indictments probably as well, so they can understand the gravity of this? This was an attempt to overthrow a presidency after it had previously been an attempt to submarine a presidential candidate who was the enemy of the sitting president. This is un-American.
Can't argue with that. But then there's that little thing called COVID that dominated 24/7 the news cycle since February. So
he chose not to. And that's extremely disappointing, because it says to me, you know what, no matter how hard you push, when you push up against the deep state, against the permanent bureaucracy in Washington, you can only get so far. You're not going to get to the whole truth, because if Bill Barr isn't willing to do it, nobody is.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and I also tend to agree. I think it would have been very easy for, the investigation is still ongoing. That's fair enough. Sometimes investigations of this scale could take, any number of additional months from now. But I think Bill Barr, at least they have had they've seen enough of the jigsaw puzzle by now to at least maybe have been able to put out some kind of interim report, like a progress report to the American people. And I do believe that possibly Bill Barr made the decision not to do that because it would be perceived as too political in the run-up to the election. But I honestly believe, personally, my view is that he should have said, I don't actually care. That perception does not matter to me. We're coming up to the man who was the target of this hoax, of this conspiracy, of this scheme. The man who was the target of it is running for re-election. It is only fair that the American people have an update on what we are discovering about what happened to him 4 years ago.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, so now has everybody done their one more thing?
I don't think I've done one.
Okay, go for it, Joe.
Well, I thought it was a very important speech, her closing arguments for Joe Biden that Michelle Obama gave the other day. She played the race card to the hilt. It was mean, it was vicious, but I think more important was it destroys this idea that Biden is cruising to victory. You don't bang a hornet's nest like that if your guy is cruising. They know what's going on here. They know that this race is close. I'd say Trump is comfortably leading, but that was a telling thing. She really took it to a whole new level of just, Black people cowering in fear in this, in Trump's racially hostile America. And you don't do that if you're feeling like you're winning a race. I think they know they're losing. And I think Michelle Obama is saying that absolutely brings that home.
I really appreciate those comments, Joe, because I think there are a lot of conservatives who are losing heart. These polls are starting to get to them. And maybe that's the idea. They figure, well, let me just stay home. What's the point? Biden's got an insurmountable lead.
They didn't stay home in 2016, and hell, Hillary Clinton was winning with 72% of the vote. So I don't think anybody even buys the polls anymore. I think it's a tired argument that is bandied about by big box media, and I think the real electorate is going, yeah, maybe, but I don't think so.
Well, I'm going to be just incredibly insufferable here and say that actually I think you are both right in a way there. I think Sarah is right that it may just not matter to conservatives, to Republicans, to Trump supporters. It may not matter what the polls say. They're just going to come out anyway. That silent majority that we all hear about, and I'm sure we all agree certainly does exist, is going to make their voices heard. But at the same time, I do tend to think that Lisa hit upon a point about these endless polls, just an avalanche of polls showing Biden ahead everywhere all the time, and his lead growing in some places where it was close before. And I do believe that there is some kind of collective effort underway to just beat conservatives, almost like beat them into submission, just smash them over the head with this notion that you're done, it's all over, you're going to lose, you have no chance. So but as coming back to Sarah's point, I'm not sure that's going to work, but I do believe it's a tactic.
Hear, hear, well said. All right, my one thing that matters is the virtual debate. President Trump is saying he doesn't want to do the virtual debate. I'd like him to change his mind. Anytime there's an opportunity to go one-on-one with Joe Biden, and this time if he actually lets Biden talk, I think he will end up tangling himself in a knot. So I would really ask President Trump, please do the debate, Mr. President.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't see why he needs to fear. Let Joe Biden have a teleprompter. He's still going to come up with 20 or 30 gaffes. What's the problem? I think Trump knows something we don't know about just how staged this was going to be and how much it was going to help Biden. Because I'm with you 100%. I think he should do it. But if he knows something, because they're really pulling out all the stops for this guy. Chris Wallace was his tag team partner in that first debate. What would they do with a totally controlled studio environment for this guy? So in that regard, I understand it. And I'm just saying, I think he knows something we don't know.
Well, in the category of half a loaf is better than none, if he is as behind in the polls as all these public polls are showing, it's a huge mistake for him not to participate, for the simple reason that 70 million people watched the first debate, and now he has a chance to make up for his subpar performance, shall we say, in the first debate, and change the subject completely here, even if it's imperfect, even if Biden cheats, even if he's got an earpiece and he's got a teleprompter, or he's got someone actually stating the words for him through an electronic voice. It doesn't matter. It puts him out in front of the American people. He's only got 2 more shots at this. And by passing this one up, there's no guarantee at all there will even be a third debate. And if there is, what's to say they're going to say anything different? They're going to call it a virtual debate, which means Trump will drop out again, which means between now and November 3rd, he doesn't have a national forum. He doesn't have a forum on national TV in front of all the American people. I think that's too big to pass up. But if you believe what Joe said, which is these polls are wrong and Trump is really winning, then he really does know something that we don't know.
Anybody else on the virtual debate?
I tend to think that, I just think the bottom line is that Trump should take what he can get. I think he should agree to do the debate in any fashion. I think he can make a huge talking point, especially if, we're going to know when we watch that debate, if it's held virtually, it's going to be obvious if it is, in fact, as staged as perhaps we all suspect it might be, and perhaps as staged as President Trump himself thinks it's going to be. I think it's going to shine through, and I think Trump could then make a huge issue about that and just go back again and again and point to that debate and say, look how set up it was. But I also think, on the other hand, Trump should actually say, look, I'm going to agree to the virtual debate format, but I just want it known. I just want it on the record that I believe we should be doing this next debate in person. And I think it's a complete joke that we're doing it virtually. But nevertheless, I'm going to go along with it.
One thing we know for sure, Mike Pence wasn't wearing an earwig, because if he was, somebody would have told him he had a fly on his head.
I always thought the Saturday Night Live's going to have a field day with this. They'll probably have a thing with, like some giant spider landing on Pence's head, and he won't know it. And then he'll jump off, and then something bigger will get on. And then it'll be some kind of a creepy monster on his head. I'm predicting that's what Saturday Night Live does with that.
Do we know that the fly wasn't actually the earwig? That was, that was what he was getting his messages through the fly.
Good conspiracy theory. Very good.
All right. Funny how so much.
I don't think the fly had anything to do with anything.
Well, funny how so much matters these days. Perhaps that's why that tired phrase, "this is the most important election of our lifetime," is actually real this year. Sometimes it feels like we're living in an ADHD world that has so much going on. It's hard to focus on things that really do matter, but I'm personally glad we did. And that's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other segments on your favorite video platform. Thanks so much for tuning in. And remember, surf on over to LibertyNation.com, subscribe to our popular conservative news daily briefing, visit our Roku channel, and now we have a Rumble page where this program can be seen along with all our other Liberty TV shows. And remember, guys, Liberty all the time and everywhere.
Extra, read all about it.
Election 2020 Big Bottom Flash Reports are coming. On election night, at the bottom of every hour, LibertyNation.com will give you Election Night 2020, 90 seconds at a time, with our Big Bottom Flash Reports. You'll get the drop with our one-stop shop. We'll shed the light on Fight Night. Tune into LibertyNation.com on election night for our Big Bottom Flash Reports at the bottom of every hour. 90 glorious seconds for everything you need to know without the spin.